Welcome to today's video where we're going to be going over some tips on how to deal with stage fright and performance anxiety. And I have a long history with performance anxiety because when I first started playing music in front of people, I would get incredibly nervous and anxious, and almost to the point where I didn't even want to play. I would just rather go home than dealing with this anxiety. My hand would start shaking really bad, and guitar is my primary instrument, so a shaky pick hand is not ideal for anything that's just not big cowboy chords. Anything intricate, I couldn't really play live. And so I chalked up that performance anxiety to not being familiar enough with music and how to play it. And when I decided to go to college for music, I thought that this performance anxiety would be over with because now I'm learning how to play music, and that anxiety I had before was because I didn't know how to play, and so it will obviously go away, and it didn't. It continued throughout my college career. I would have countless performances in front of teachers, students, at bars, at venues, wherever, and I would get anxiety each time. And finally, I got to my senior year. I'm just about to graduate and get my music degree, and I think to myself, finally, this is it. I've got a music degree. That means my anxiety will go away, and it still didn't. I still dealt with the same thing. You know, sometimes I would play and my pick hand would start shaking. Almost involuntarily, it was like the anxiety was manifesting itself into my shaking hand. And so what I had to do is come to terms with the fact that I will probably always have stage fright and performance anxiety. So if that's the case, then what are some tips on how to deal with that, how to come to grips with that fact? And I'm going to go over 3 tips that will hopefully help you and me start dealing with stage fright and performance anxiety. And the first tip is practice your music. And practicing music is important in essentially every realm of music, so it's nothing new here. It's just very important when dealing with things like stage fright, because you want to know that you can play the piece itself before you even get on stage. I like to get to the point where I can play my piece by itself in its entirety at any time of the day. So oftentimes you'll have a practice session where you have the piece under your fingers, you're acclimated to what it sounds like, and that might not always be the case when you go to perform it live. You might just show up at the venue and they go, okay, here you go on stage, and you have to basically play your piece cold. You don't really have that much warm-up time. So getting to the point where you can play it at any time during the day will really help you in terms of dealing with your stage fright over whether or not you know you can play the piece. And it also helps to be able to play the music from memory. Now, you can always bring your music with you on a music stand, and that's perfectly okay. That oftentimes I recommend that because you have the music in front of you. If you get flustered, you can always reference it. But in terms of your muscle memory, you want to know you can play that piece solid, no problem, without looking at your music. And that'll start alleviating some of your anxiety because you know you can play it from memory no matter what, even if you didn't have your sheet music. The second tip is prepare for things that are not music related. These are things like, do you know where the venue is? If you've never been there before, try and go a day or two beforehand and plot out your course and know exactly where you're going to park, where you're going to walk into, what the actual place is that you're performing. Is it a banquet hall? Is it a performance hall? Is it some random classroom? Whatever it may be, you want to know exactly where it is, because on the day of, when your mind starts getting anxious, you want to be able to say to yourself, I know exactly where it is. I don't need to worry about that. And going along with this is you want to know how long it takes you to get to a venue. If it's 30 minutes away, I like to add 30 minutes on top of that. That way you can take your time if you miss some lights, if there's an accident, if you have to take a detour, if there's construction. Basically anything, you know you have 30 minutes built in that you don't have to worry about. You can take your time. You can find another route without worrying about rushing to get where you're going as well as performing. And I also like to make sure all my music and gear is loaded up way before I even have to leave, ideally the night before. I like to make sure my guitar, the case, the music, the stand, all my equipment, my guitar straps, my guitar picks, capos, tuners, whatever you need, set it aside so you can start planning for that when you're not in the anxiety mood. And that's what a lot of these tips are. dealing with things before you start to get anxious. So that way you are supremely confident, and at least you know those things are taken care of and you don't have to worry about that. And my third tip for dealing with performance anxiety and stage fright is probably the hardest to keep in mind when you're about to go on stage. And that is, people don't care if you mess up. I've messed up countless times on performances. Maybe that says a little bit about me, but I thought they were extremely noticeable and that everybody would be laughing at me. And it turns out afterwards, nobody even noticed. And even if you do make a mistake, they can oftentimes work in your favor to make the piece more interesting. I remember I had a piano recital where I was playing Go the Distance from Disney's Hercules on piano. And it was a new technique that I was learning on chord soloing, where you play the chords in the left hand and you play the melody in the right hand. And there was one passage that was tricky and I had practiced, but again, I wasn't quite confident enough in it. And I did what turned out to be a chromatic dissension into the next chord. I thought the world was going to end and I would have to go live in the woods because people would make fun of me and my life was over. Well, it turned out it sounded pretty cool. It sounded out of key, it sounded chromatic, and it sounded a little jazzy because you're using these chromatic passing chords, where it made the music more interesting, where in the moment I thought this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And just know that people don't care, and even if you mess up, it might add a little to their performance. So don't dwell on that, and it's important to keep telling yourself these things over and over and over during the day of your performance. Those things will go right out your mind if you're not drilling them into your head. It's really beneficial if it's a solo piece. So going back to my piano piece, it was a solo piano. So any mistake I made was just a part of the performance. And the key was I kept going. No matter what happens, just keep going, keep going. If it's a solo piece or if it's your own piece, a cover, whatever it may be, just keep going. People will not notice any mistakes you make, especially if you're playing a piece and you jump from one measure to 4 measures later. They might think something sounds a little strange, but they really won't notice. What they will notice is if you stop. So never stop, just keep going and finish it to the best of your ability. And I know this helped me sometimes when I would play and I'd look out in the crowd that some people are zoning out. Some people don't want to be there. Some people have to be there for an assignment or whatever it may be. Maybe they're watching their kid play and they don't really care about you. I use that to my advantage. I'm like, oh, nobody really cares. And that's the important part. And it's something to keep in mind during all of this. Nobody cares. Your life isn't going to end because you made one mistake or you missed a note. And there's some things that happen during a performance that you can't control and will make you a better performer, even though it will give you severe anxiety in the moment. And for an example of this, I was playing live one day and my A string broke during the middle of a song. And for some reason, it threw the bottom 3 strings out of tune, the G, B, and E strings. I guess the tension on the neck, it wobbled, and I played a little bit. I noticed the E and the D strings were still in tune, but the bottom 3 weren't. So on the fly, I had to learn different ways to play a song. And I finished it, and I said, wow, I actually did that. That was something I never could have prepared for, a string breaking. It was nerve-wracking in the moment. I wanted the earth to open up and swallow me when it happened. But I noticed afterwards that, one, either nobody even noticed what happened. They might have noticed the sound of the guitar changed, or they were impressed that I kept going and didn't get flustered. It's almost a way for you to get thrown out there and see what happens. There's no way to account for a string breaking. I could have practiced all I want, and there's no way I would have known that would happen. But now I know I can do it. And that's something that's really beneficial. So something might happen during your performance that you think is the worst thing in the world, where actually when you look back on it, you can say, that wasn't a lot of fun. in the moment, but man, that really helped me out. And so those are my 3 tips on how to deal with stage fright and performance anxiety. Like I said, I've dealt with this basically anytime I perform live. So I hope these tips will help you. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below. I'd love to hear from some of your experience as well. And thank you for watching.